Hello everyone, and welcome to the fourth interview in our series covering all 7 of our cat-friendly principles. Now, all our work at iCatCare over the years has been underpinned by these principles. They're a framework which informs everything that we do. There are 7 of them in total. 3 of them are dedicated to the cat, and 4 relate to the way of working with cats and with each other to champion cat welfare. So today we'll be focusing on the 4th cat-friendly principle: be solution-driven for cats. Find evidence-based, pragmatic and sustainable solutions for cats. I'm joined by Dr Lauren Finka, who is someone I've known for many years, and I can't think of anyone better to talk with about this incredibly important principle. You may feel that if the principle isn't directly about the cat, then it has less value, but I'm sure that once you've heard what Lauren has to say, you will change your mind. Thank you very much for joining me today, Lauren, to talk about iCatCare's cat-friendly principle, be solution-driven for cats. Although I'm sure that many of our subscribers know you, can you tell everyone a bit about your background?
Yeah, I'd love to. So thank you so much for having me. I've been an academic for about 15 years now. I've always been cat focused, so domestic cat behaviour and welfare predominantly. And I've always worked very closely with the rehoming sector and the animal welfare sector in general. So my real passion in terms of what I do academically is always how we can generate information that is good quality and also helps us to know how we can, in very practical context, make things better for cats. So whether that is understanding real-time pain indicators from the facial features of cats, whether that is optimizing the human-cat relationship and how we're interacting with cats, whether that's being able to read their behaviour and posture better, or understand and kind of critically look at the current evidence base we have on a certain topic, such as how we house cats, whether in groups or individually, and the impacts on their welfare. All of the stuff I do is really sort of focused on what we can extract from a scientific kind of context and how we can make that work in the real world. So I'm all about having real world impact, I guess. And before I was working as an academic, I also spent quite a lot of time in rescue. So I actually used to work as a rehomer. So I think that gave me a real insight into what is the practical landscape, certainly just in the UK, I should add. And so I think, and also kind of what are the sort of limitations around our knowledge, resources, and all those sorts of things. And that has very much sort of stayed with me, informed the way that I work, particularly when I've done research in a sort of a rehoming context, or I've been an advisor. That's always been a really important aspect, as well as kind of understanding the context that we want to apply the information to. I think, and I don't want to waffle on too long, but just a final point around that, I think, is that what we often see in the academic world is a disconnect between the people that are trying to answer these scientific questions and the people that could benefit most from that information. And I think it's often the case that academics will go in and try to develop like a tool or an application or some sort of intervention that could be really helpful to those working in cat welfare context, but they don't maybe understand how the practicalities of how that needs to be employed to really be usable and accessible to the key stakeholders. So that's kind of something that I'm really keen to avoid doing with the way that I work. And now I work at Cats Protection. I'm leading across these key work streams, which are focused around developing welfare assessment tools for unowned cats, for owned cats, and shelter cats. And so there's a lot of work. It's going to take a long time. And one of the reasons it's going to take such a long time is because we're really doing this from a ground up approach, where we're involving our stakeholders as much as we can along the way. And we're really trying to fully understand the problems before we're trying to solutionize. So, and this just takes a lot of time and resources, unfortunately, but I'm really hopeful that this is kind of setting a new kind of precedent for the way that we can fuse academic research and science with like welfare organizations and sort of real on the ground practical ways of working. I could go on further, but I will stop there.
That is a brilliant segue, actually, to my next question. Thank you for that, Lauren. So I want to look at the part of the principle that talks about finding an evidence base for solutions to problems. So in this sector, we're having to make decisions all the time about individual cats, and even some of those decisions are at a population level. We're confronted with all these problems on a daily basis, and we need to find solutions for them. And obviously, there are times when we need to seek out the evidence base to support those solutions. And for me, and you've articulated this beautifully already, I think, your superpower is making science accessible to the masses, like myself. Do you think that it's easy for people in the sector to find and actually interpret good science to help them to make decisions?
That's a great question. It's not easy for academics to do that. So it's absolutely not easy at all for people that are working in the sector. And I think there are a few key barriers if we think about that accessibility. So we can unpack that a little bit. First of all, the key, very practical aspect of that is that a lot of papers still sit behind paywalls. So unless you have some sort of university affiliation, accessing a whole paper, apart from just the abstract, can be really, really difficult. We've also got the issues around once you've accessed the paper, if you can, the information can be really, really challenging to digest. And that is not just for the layperson, but it's also for scientists as well. So sometimes I might spend a whole day trying to pick apart and understand the specifics of a study. And that could be just because it's very complex. It could be because the methodology and the analysis is very difficult to understand. It's very technical. But often it can be because it's not necessarily written in a way that's sufficiently explanatory. So it's very difficult to understand from that paper what are the key take-home messages? What can we actually infer based on the evidence? And often you might find that the conclusions that are made about the results that have been generated are not something that everybody might agree with. So there's a lot of subjectivity that goes into the scientific process, and you get varying degrees of quality of papers as well. So some of them, look like they've been very well designed and implemented, and others you might find that there's maybe what seem to be fundamental flaws with the method. So are the conclusions actually completely can we trust the data? So there's all those things going on as well. And also it takes a lot of skill to be able to critically evaluate a body of evidence and actually say, well, from all of this research, what can we actually say? What do we really know about, for example, are multi-cat environments stressful for cats? Do we know that? So that was one of the reviews I did a while ago where we critically looked at the evidence, and we don't have the evidence to unequivocally say that they are more stressful. It's actually very nuanced and complex and depends on multiple different factors that are all going to influence how a cat experiences their environment. So that's really challenging. It's very difficult for scientists to be able to do a very good critical appraisal. So it's not something that we would expect a person that is working practically with cats to have the time or the capacity to take on. And also, if we think about the body of evidence that exists, it's not balanced. So some areas are much better researched than others, and that depends on the interests of the scientists. It also depends on the funding that's available, how much things can be followed up, and does stuff get published or not. You've also got a bias towards publishing things where you get significant results. So if you don't find anything, or you don't find what you anticipated, some people might choose not to actually publish that work. So there's so much that goes into actually what ends up available, and to academics, but also to the people working on the ground. You can use Google Scholar. That's very helpful. But again, would you know what keywords to put in to generate the right papers? And are you going to have time to read through a full paper? Can you get enough from the abstract? And also, can we practically apply the key learnings? So sometimes it is very easy to do that. Other times it's really tricky. For example, we have a lot of papers that tell us that hiding places are really good for cats. So we can unequivocally say, yes, this is a good thing to do. We have pretty much nothing that tells us what makes a good hiding place from a cat's perspective. So actually, we could say, okay, we know that cardboard boxes are really good to put into a cat's pen, but maybe we're not thinking about like the direction that that cardboard box is facing, or like whether it's on the ground or on the floor, how we're draping towels or blankets over that, what we're placing it next to, is it in a very busy exposed area or a quiet area, and all of those specific things, to my mind, when we think about it from a cat's perspective, they make a difference whether that cat thinks it has a hiding space or not. Now that doesn't exist in the scientific literature because that hasn't really been looked at. So again, we can't necessarily directly like extract everything we want from the literature and apply it perfectly in practice. So it's really tricky. So what I would say is that if we are an organization that is generating guidelines and advice to others, we need to make sure that we have considered all of these limitations. We are trying to be evidence-based as much as we can, and we're critically evaluating that evidence before we are kind of sharing that out. But I do think there is much more that could be done to make science more accessible and digestible to the people that would really benefit from applying it on the ground.
I completely agree with you. And just to be clear to everyone, all our subscribers, we still think a hiding place is a good thing. So don't suddenly stop putting them in thinking, I don't know which direction it should go or whatever. We still think it's a good thing. But I totally take on board what you're saying. We don't know when it comes to a quality thing. We know it's a good idea, but it's the quality that matters. It's what that should look like for that individual. So, and I think what I'm certainly hearing from what you're saying is we're not quite there yet. It's complicated rather than just saying making science more accessible. It's very complicated.
Could I just add, yes, I just want to say, like, we absolutely should be providing as many hiding places as we possibly can. So yeah, it's just about what the science can tell us about that. So I think what's really missing is that more critical thinking from a cat's perspective about how we provide those spaces to make sure that they really work from their perspective. But and that isn't always an easy skill. So I think the more we put in, the better, so that we're kind of reducing all those errors in terms of like placement and provisions. But yes, like there's no question that hiding spaces are very, very important, however they come.
Exactly. And this sort of leads me to my next question, really, about the available science. A lot of the things we talk about at some level is about knowledge that we've gained from human psychology or different fields or research on other animals. And that's just because it's just not available in our chosen species. And a lot of us, with some understanding of that science and our own experience, sort of roughly know what good looks like, but it's not technically got that evidence base for cats. Do you have any thoughts on this? Whether that's okay or?
Yeah, that's really tricky. So I think that does very much link back into the previous point about how much we can prove and how much we still don't really know. So I think taking a best practice approach is always the best way to go. And for me, that is really combining, the current sort of best sort of critical scientific thinking on a topic, and that sort of a mixture of what we know from the literature and also what scientists kind of have built up in terms of their experience and kind of how they've developed their thinking over time. So that's kind of one aspect. And then I think that's also needs to be combined with what we can actually take directly from the literature when we've done our critical appraisal and kind of understood what we think is relevant to apply. And then it's also sort of integrating that key expertise and experience from the stakeholders on the ground, so they can know what works in practice and what doesn't. And then, as you said, taking learnings from other fields where the studies that are being species have the species that are being studied have very similar systems to cats, so we can carefully extrapolate quite a lot when it kind of relates to good principles of like care provision for mammals, for example. And a lot of things that actually we probably would like to have more evidence on, they wouldn't necessarily always be ethical for us to conduct. So that's another tricky thing, is actually we are going to have to, err on the side of caution with what we think we want to push forwards as like how to fill knowledge gaps. Some of them are kind of better not filled in the way that would give us the best like hard evidence of something. It's just safe to assume that we know that wouldn't be nice or ethical or very kind. So we can kind of just accept that that's something we would want to avoid. Yeah, so it is really tricky, but I think kind of that approach of combining the expertise of multiple stakeholders, and trying to understand how to be pragmatic within all of that is kind of the best way to address those things.
That kind of leads me on to the next part, really, my next question about pragmatism, because part of the cat-friendly principle about being solution-driven is about being pragmatic. And I think that a lot of your research is about practical applications of things, what you can actually do on the ground, so to speak. So do you think as a sector, we're getting the whole pragmatism thing right? Do you think we are pragmatic?
I can only sort of speak from my own experiences, and that's very much like UK centric. For me, being pragmatic in a cat welfare context is really about reflecting and questioning and being curious about the ways we're doing things and the decisions we're making. And in all of that, just coming back to the impact it's actually having on specific cats or a population of cats. Because I think it's very easy for us to get lose sight of that when we've done things a certain way for a long time, or we make a lot of assumptions about what works or what doesn't work, or we have in our head, well, this has what I'm doing has a positive intention with it, therefore it will be received positively by the cat. And I think there's often a disconnect between losing the ability to kind of objectively look and see, are these things actually helping from the cat's perspective? And I think, we can talk about that in terms of the interactions we have with cats or the types of enrichment we might provide. If we label something as an enriching item, we might assume that the cat is always going to experience it like that, or that it works for that individual. But actually, it's a lot more complicated in terms of meeting the specific needs and preferences of individual cats. And what might be very enriching for one cat might be stressful and too arousing for another. And it's exactly the same with how we interact with cats. So for one cat, lots of heavy stroking and cuddling and lots of close contact with people might be absolutely wonderful and meeting all of their social needs. And for another cat, that could be the absolute worst, most stressful thing that you could do with them. So I think it's it's very challenging to kind of get that balance right, really. But really sort of thinking about that individualized care, and always coming back to the cat when we are thinking about what we're doing.
Yeah. And actually that in itself is a challenge when you think how hard people work, and what we're expecting them to do is reflect while they're doing things, not just afterwards, but that constant sense of reflecting on your actions as you're carrying them out. But I think you're right. If we get it into our heads about the number one cat-friendly principle about respect cats, get to know the species, but specifically get to know the individual, then that can only be a good thing for them. Just moving on to another part of this particular cat-friendly principle, which is about sustainable solutions. This for me is incredibly important because so many solutions that are applied are just not sustainable. So they kind of die out, and you're really wasting resources to consider that to be a solution. So do you have any examples that you can think of from your own experience where there has been a solution that has been sustainable over time, and what the qualities of that solution were?
A great example would probably be the work I did with Battersea Dogs and Cats Home. So quite a few years ago, I worked quite closely with Lindsay Quinlan, who was the head of catteries there. And obviously yourself came along for some of that time as well, which is great. And what we did was kind of went through a whole revolution of stress management and cat-focused ways of caring for cats within the catteries. And I think what made it very sustainable was having the right people on board and engaged at various like senior levels, and people that had the ability to implement change quite quickly. And there was also like a multifaceted approach where we changed a lot of the practical aspects of cats' environment. So putting lots of hiding places in, putting lots of buffering of hiding. So not just putting one place for a cat to hide, but having towels or like they had like these nice curtains that were kind of draped from different places within the pens, and that's a really good way to create these layers and buffers of hiding places. So there's always lots of places the cat can go and move around in their pen where they can feel not too exposed, so they're not coming out of one hiding space and just have this big open space, and that can feel very overwhelming for cats. So that worked very well in terms of creating a safe physical environment for cats. And then we also did a lot around how people were interacting with cats as well. So we did lots of application of basic guidelines so that they could understand what cat-friendly interactions look like from a cat-centric perspective. And they were very kind of simple. And then we also had lots of training that we did as well. So people got a lot of the theory in a sort of nicely digestible, interactive way. So it's not just the what to do and practical changes, also kind of giving people empowering people to understand the why of what we're sort of moving to and what we're changing. And I think all of that was done with the sensitivity around the fact that this is human behavior change that we're really talking about here. So pretty much all the things that we wanted to change that we thought would optimize the well-being of cats really involves people doing things a little bit differently. So it's kind of being sympathetic to that it takes time, and trying to understand the human and emotional elements to that, rather than trying to force things through, but actually try and work with people. And I think what for me was one of the really key aspects of making this sustainable was that it was that allowing people to feel sufficiently in control and empowered through that process. And I think that then enables them to carry that forward. They understand what to do, how to do it, and why they're doing it. And I think that's like a very sort of powerful package altogether, and help to sort of embed all of those new practices. And I think we've really seen a wonderful cultural shift within the catteries in terms of just ways of thinking about cats, which has been absolutely wonderful to see. And certainly when I first started collaborating with them, it was a long time ago now, when I was collecting data for my PhD. Just the ways of thinking about cats, the ways of working, what the cattery looked like in terms of provisioning to where it is now. It's unrecognizable, and it's really wonderful to have seen that evolution. So yeah, I think that's a good example of what sustainable change looks like. And everything was very, very simple. Nothing was complicated that we did in terms of all the interventions. So
I love that. I completely agree. And it's lovely talking to people who've gone through that transformational process, because they talk about it being part of their DNA now, and it just comes naturally to them, which is wonderful to see. And I think your tip about all stakeholders being involved and agreeing to what you're planning to do is really important. Senior management, trustees, right the way down to people who work on a voluntary basis. It's so important. So thank you for that. That's great. So I want to go full circle now back to the principle. And I'm wondering that on the concept of being solution driven for cats as a sector, are we actually really stepping back and looking at the challenges and problems we face and searching for solutions? Or is the sector suffering from being so incredibly busy and overwhelmed that it spends time firefighting instead? So I'm sort of asking this question in two parts, I think. That's the first part. The second part is, if you feel that is the case, what is your message to organisations you'd want them to hear regarding becoming more solution driven?
yeah, a great question that's, I think, difficult to comprehensively answer quickly, but I think it's really important to acknowledge that we have this perfect storm at the moment in terms of this post-pandemic sort of mass lockdown acquisition of pets, maybe amongst people that haven't had a long history of pet keeping, or weren't thinking about sustainability in terms of supporting those pets long term. And then you've got the cost of living crisis. So I think all of that has put massive amounts of pressure and strain, certainly on the UK sector. And I think it's incredibly difficult to be somebody that's on the front line, that is dealing with people that have these horrendously heartbreaking stories and reasons that they want to relinquish pets, or people that are maybe even being threatening or abusive if they're hearing a no. I think, and especially if these people are, you know, volunteers or people that haven't had any training in dealing with those situations, I think we can't underestimate how that must feel, how much pressure and how much emotional burden that is placing on those individuals. So I completely understand how it must feel like you can't be anything other than having to firefight in that situation. And it's easy for me to say what I'm going to say next because that isn't what I do and I haven't had a lot of experience of that at all. But I suppose my advice would be that, you know, coming back to that idea of sustainability, we are only as able to we're only able to kind of be as effective and good and do what we want as we are able to take care of ourselves. And I'm just going to like deviate a little bit and talk about Brené Brown very briefly, but I love some of her research around. She looked at she interviewed all different sorts of people from all different care professions around the world, and she looked at what was the feature that unified those individuals, what allowed them to be so giving and caring and supportive. And the thing that she identified was having boundaries of steel, and this related to, I guess, doing what they needed to protect themselves or protect the organization that they had created, to ensure that what they were doing could carry on in a way that was sustainable. So I guess we can bring this back to the idea of burnout and this constant feeling of firefighting. And for me, that just isn't sustainable at the individual or the organizational level. And I don't know if we are really helping as many animals as we would like with that strategy. So I guess it's about trying to incorporate that pragmatic thinking, trying to understand what are the best solutions to the problems that we are, we are faced with, and thinking about our resources. How are we best placed to contribute to that? So it might be actually doing a smaller amount of stuff, but doing it well, because or as well as we can, because they're the resources and the skills that we best have. I kind of feel like a lot of us are trying to solve everything at once, and it's not an individual or a single organization's responsibility to do all of that. So I probably waffled on a little bit too long, but I suppose it's about being quite clear about what we're trying to achieve, being boundaried where we think that that's going to support our sustainability, and really sort of focusing on the impact and outputs we're having, and not being afraid to kind of reassess if what we're currently doing is the right thing. But it's hard. I think how do you, if you feel that massive overwhelm, how do you step back and get and have thinking space? That's a really difficult one. But I do think more reflection, trying to do less but doing it really well, is beneficial for us, the sector, but it's also going to help more cats, hopefully, because I think we know that capacity for care is so critical to effective solutions for populations of cats.
I think that's really great advice. Thank you ever so much, Lauren. And I think both of us are utterly supportive of the people who are actually working at the coalface, so to speak, and how hard they work. And I think that little message of self-care is really important too, and it's probably a good place to end. We can only do what we do if we take care of ourselves first, so that we're physically and mentally able to do it. So that was brilliant. I could talk to you forever. That was so interesting. Thank you so much, and thank you for speaking to me and sort of sharing your thoughts on the fourth cat-friendly principle of being solution-driven. So thanks a lot, Lauren, and thank you to everyone for joining us.
Thanks, Vicky.